and welcome to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Clifford Brown, his life and times and best hits, and on this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of some of the albums we're going to be talking about. The first album is called A Study in Brown. This one was released in 1955, and it was recorded by the Clifford Brown Max Roach quintet. This one's an exceptional bebop album. Max Roach and Clifford Brown are the stars of this album. The Best of Clifford Brown was released in 1997, a compilation of recordings that Brown performed for Blue Note and Pacific Jazz. His unique hard bop style also makes an appearance in this album. At Basin Street was released in 1956. This was the last album collaboration between Clifford Brown and the Max Roach Quintet, another hard bop classic album. This album was instrumental in taking bebop to new heights. And Verve Jazz Masters 44, another great compilation of Clifford Brown performances. There's popular classics from the trumpet legend as well as some not so famous hits, a compilation of his best performances with various bands over the years. So that was a quick recap of some of the albums we're going to be talking about on this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, Clifford Brown, his life and times and best hits, and on this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first album is called Study in Brown. This one was released in 1955. This one's a 1955 version of the Clifford Brown Max Roach Quintet. In this album, there's an appearance by tenor saxophonist Harold Land, pianist Richie Powell, and bassist George Morrow. This band was one of the early hard bop bands, and this one's an exceptional bebop album. It's full of rhythm and drive. It's also got some romantic compilations of tracks. There's a lot of drum solos in the album by Max Roach. He always keeps them fresh and interesting. For example, the song Gherkin for Perkin, where he improvises a lot. There's mellow romantic ballads and upbeat peppy songs. There's a song that blends both the above, Georgia's Dilemma. In this song, the entire band plays together, creating a unique, distinct sound. Overall, a series of easy listening tracks played with warmth and passion, with Max Roach and Clifford Brown being the stars of this album. The next album is called The Best of Clifford Brown. This one was released in 1997. This one's a compilation of recordings that Brown performed for the Blue Note and Pacific Jazz labels. His unique hard bop style also makes an appearance in this album. There's 13 tracks here, and they're a great way to gain an insight into Brown as a soloist and a band leader. Brown was mainly influenced by Fats Navarro and followed the hard bop style of Miles Davis. His overall style was like that of trumpet legend Louis Armstrong. So in this album, his ballads are up there with Armstrong's. Some of the highlights of this album, the songs Brownie Speaks, Easy Living, Once in a While, and A Night in Tunisia. At Basin Street is the next album. This one was released in 1956. This one's the last album collaboration between Clifford Brown and the Max Roach Quintet. It also features Sonny Rollins on tenor saxophone, another hard bop classic album. There's memorable renditions of songs like I'll Remember April, What Is This Thing Called Love, and more. So this album showcases 5 legendary musicians playing at the peak of their careers. And this album was instrumental in taking bebop to new heights. It would go on to be known as hard bop. Clifford Brown and Sonny Rollins' improvisation is great on this album, while the drum beats powered by Max Roach adds a special energy to the album. And an album called Verve Jazz Masters 44. This one's another great compilation of Clifford Brown performances. There's popular classics from the trumpet legend as well as some not so famous hits. A compilation of his best performances with various bands over the years. One of the highlights is the song Gertrude's Bounce, a bit of a Christmassy song, happy and playful. Clifford's solos on this song is epic. Another song, Stardust, featuring beautiful trumpet music from Brown. Jordu is a collaboration between Brown and drummer Max Roach. This song is one of the most famous compositions in jazz. It was composed by pianist Duke Jordan in 1947. Clifford, Max and company play through the tracks with a very swinging style. There's 2 versions of the song What's New, one with Helen Merrill's vocals and another featuring Clifford Brown with string accompaniment. And a song called It Might As Well Be Spring, featuring a collaboration between Clifford Brown and legendary singer Dinah Washington. So overall, a great compilation of Clifford Brown hits taken from over the years. This is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, Clifford Brown, his life and times and best albums. And now it's time to talk about some album news. John Alvey is a drummer hailing from Nashville, and his debut album Soft Glow is set to be released on Jazz Music City Records on August 23rd. The album contains a series of post-bop jazz tracks. He's joined on the album by Ronald Barber on trombone, Joel Fram on saxophone, pianist Matt Endall, and bassist Jacob Jezioro. So this album is about his experiences growing up in the music scene in Nashville. He recalls he would practice in a small studio apartment in his home. It was a relaxed transitional time in his life. The songs in this album reflect those experiences. So this album contains original compositions by Alvy's band, also some covers of popular classics by his favorite musicians from Ron Carter to John Stubblefield. Some of the highlights from this album: a suspense-filled rendition of Baby Man by John Stubblefield. Terminal 1 is a Latin cover of the song of the same title by Benny Golson. There's also original tunes, and on these tracks we get the chance to see the bandmates excelling in solo performances. For more information, please visit www.johnlvmusic.com. And that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Clifford Brown's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Clifford Brown, his life and times, and best hits. On this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up on this hour. The first album is called The Definitive Clifford Brown. This album gives us an insight into how Brown expanded on bebop. It also gives us a glimpse into his style and popular hits. Helen, Merrill with Clifford Brown was released in 1954. This one's a collaboration between Clifford and vocalist Helen Merrill, recorded in 1954. Merrill was an enchanting singer of her time, particularly good in an orchestral jazz setting. Clifford's trumpet playing perfectly complements her vocals. Art Blakey and Clifford Brown, A Night at Birdland, is the next album. This album was recorded by Clifford Brown in collaboration with Art Blakey's band, the Jazz Messengers. And this album was recorded at the beginning of the hard bop era. Art Blakey was one of the pioneers of that genre. So this album is one of Carter's best collaborations from the bop genre. And an album called Clifford Brown and Max Roach, released in 1954, another star album by Brown and his quintet. They recorded in collaboration with Max Roach, a compilation of warm, passionate bebop tracks. This album was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1999. So that was a quick recap of what's coming up on this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's episode, Clifford Brown, his life and times, and best albums. On this hour, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. The first album is called The Definitive Clifford Brown. This album gives us an insight into how Brown expanded on bebop. There's several amazing hard bop tracks in this album, especially those recorded alongside Max Roach for MRC Records. In this album, it's warm melodies, string instrumentals mainly backed by vocals by Helen Merrill, Dinah Washington, and Sarah Vaughan. Also includes tracks featuring a rather underrated tenor saxophonist from that time, Harold Land. Two of Clifford's most famous compositions make an appearance here, Joy Spring and Dahoud. There's a beautiful cover of I'll Remember April. So overall, this album gives us a glimpse into Clifford Brown's style and most popular hits. The next album is called Helen Merrill with Clifford Brown. This one was released in 1954. This one's a collaboration between Clifford Brown and vocalist Helen Merrill. Merrill was an enchanting singer of her time, particularly good in an orchestral jazz setting. And Clifford's playing style was great as background instrumentals for vocalists. And in this album, his music perfectly complements Merrill's spirited, bouncy delivery. The rest of the background music is soft and delicate. There's Danny Banks on flute, Quincy Jones on arrangements. Most of the tracks are inspired by Broadway musicals. Some of the highlights from this album: a mournful lullaby called Don't Explain, and Swonderful, a popular George Gershwin classic. Also Anything Goes, which is interpreted as a romantic ballad here. The next album is called Art Blakey and Clifford Brown, A Night at Birdland. This album was recorded by Clifford Brown in collaboration with Art Blakey's band, the Jazz Messengers. There's 3 Horace Silver compositions: Split Kick, Quicksilver, and May Ray. These tracks are all hard bop tracks. There's also more traditional bop theme classics like A Night in Tunisia. So all these bop tracks add an intense energy to this album. Probably the highlight of this album is the track Once in a While. Clifford's delivery is inspiring and beautiful on this track. The album also features Lou Donaldson on alto saxophone. His playing is peppy and energetic, full of passion. Horace Silver contributes 3 tracks to this album. Original compositions. He's both a great pianist and composer. Curly Russell's on bass, adding a groovy rhythm to the tracks. So this album was recorded at the beginning of the hard bop era, and Art Blakey was one of the pioneers of that genre. And so this album is one of Carter's best collaborations from the bop genre. The next album is called Clifford Brown and Max Roach. This was recorded in 1954. Another star album by Brown and his quintet. They recorded it in collaboration with Max Roach. The album received critical acclaim. 2 of the tracks from the album went on to become jazz classics, the tracks Dahoud and Joy Spring. The track Joy Spring was actually a tribute to Brown's wife, whom he called his Joy Spring. The album was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1999, a compilation of warm, passionate bebop tracks. Some of the standout tracks in the album include Delilah, The Blues Walk, and Dahoud. So this album was created as a result of Max Roach inviting Clifford Brown over to create a band with him. They started out by selecting musicians from Hollywood to form a quintet. Some of the early band members include Sonny Stitt, Teddy Edwards, Carl Perkins, and more. The band went on to see notable success.